Hi, it's Dr. Greg Jantz. Another important topic. I'm the founder here at the Center, a place of hope, celebrating 40 years. I want to talk about it's a difficult topic, childhood trauma grief. Let me say that again, childhood trauma grief. Many times trauma from childhood, we bring all that into adulthood. We carry that in various ways, that trauma. I believe we carry it physically, we carry it in our emotions, and there is a significant struggle that childhood grief brings into our relationships in adulthood, how we see ourselves. I want to define what is childhood traumatic grief. In my notes, I've made 2 points to keep it really simple. Grief, it's grief caused by traumatic loss during childhood. That loss comes in different forms. Traumatic grief could be a death in the family, the loss of a parent. It could be a loss of a sibling. It could be moving across the country into a situation that ended up not being good. But there's the traumatic grief. And that traumatic grief you carry because as a child, that trauma is experienced differently than it is as an adult. Here's point number 2. It involves intense sadness and fear and confusion around what happened. Intense sadness. So this is childhood sadness. Probably a lot of fear and confusion that's tied to this event or whatever happened. Whether you were 4 or 5 years old or 10, 11, 12, you're going to experience and have memory and recall really consistent with your developmental age. So early on, the terror and the fear could be very significant from a loss. Early attachment and bonding, and suddenly a loved one, a parent is gone. The main caregiver is gone. Everyone experiences the trauma a little differently, but they will carry it with them into adulthood. There's adult depression, anxiety, and sometimes it feels like as a child that it was abandonment and you carried that abandonment, and it feels like betrayal or abandonment. What happened? And as a child too, we learn at times to blame ourselves. If I didn't do that, or if I was only better, I wouldn't have lost my mom, or I wouldn't have lost my dad, or my brother or sister. So there is an impact. Emotional impact of traumatic grief is going to affect, I've made notes, future trust, what we call emotion regulation, ability to handle anger, fear, guilt, managing our emotions where our emotions aren't just running out of control. It's going to affect our self-esteem. So there is a significant impact of childhood traumatic grief. You may also carry as an adult persistent feelings of loss, abandonment, and sadness. Remember those 3 I wrote down: loss, abandonment, and sadness. That's what you can carry from grief, traumatic grief from childhood. Now, we all had things in childhood that, as a kid, we were impacted by. But we're talking now about something that's so significant, so traumatic, that it had a profound impact. It's generally very significant, sudden loss. Even if you had a sick parent and you visited them. I think of a situation that recently we dealt with where two children visited their mom in the hospital, and no frame of reference for this. And first few visits, mom is there, and then mom's condition deteriorated, and she was more or less in a coma. The kids saw her, she couldn't respond to them, and that was traumatic. And then shortly after that, the mom died. And you can provide whatever explanation to two young children, but it makes no sense. You can provide comfort, which is needed, but it still will not make sense, and it still will be quite a traumatic event. All right, number 3, how do you recognize that this is an issue in adulthood? You're going to have difficulty, 2 simple points. Difficulty maintaining significant relationships. Okay, I just have trouble maintaining trusty, healthy relationships. And I'm just going to experience probably this ongoing emotional numbness, or I may notice extremes in my emotional outburst, restriction, but my emotions are like they're running me. Those are 2 things you're going to notice: relationships and emotions. It is hard to heal at times because of addiction, because of hiding, isolating even more from people because of childhood trauma that was very significant. You don't want to have a relationship, or if things get stressful, you pull away. That certainly is part of it. And you feel like you can't really trust anybody, so to be vulnerable is huge. To be vulnerable. All right, there's a couple key healing steps we want to mention. We got to acknowledge this grief and the significance of the trauma. You may even sit down for a journal and write down all of the feelings associated with this, all the memories associated with it, all the impacts that you feel, and you just kind of go through a kind of a life history, and you begin to just write down all the effects of this over time. Even your physical health. Even maybe career-wise, and decisions you've made in relationships, how you see yourself. And the list of how this impacted could be quite a long list. But so we've got to come to a place of understanding, of awareness, of getting out of denial. This had a huge impact. And then we've got to decide what we're going to do with this. There's times where I've got to learn a whole new way of relating with people. I've got to forgive the past. I have to ultimately forgive the situation, whatever it was, and understanding as a child it was out of my control. So it is important that this is dealt with. It will affect us the rest of our life, but there is a process of going through, even when the brain is traumatized and the brain has been affected. This is why the whole person approach is so, so important. But the overall effects of this childhood trauma can and needs to be dealt with, but we've got to deal with the whole person. That's why I said the brain trauma. We've got to deal with what did this do to me physically. Has it affected my self-care, how I take care of myself? Has it affected my sleep? It affects everything. My beliefs around faith or spirituality, my beliefs around God, it affects everything. So there is a process of restoration, a process of rebuilding our worth, our self-esteem, who we really are, how to relearn regulating our emotions, how to see situations without being reactive or hypersensitive, and how to build trust in relationships. Those are just a few of the keys that one needs to work with. I'm going to say on childhood traumatic grief, this is where we really need the professional intervention. There's times that we can work through things with trusted friends, but this is one that is deep and the trauma needs to be addressed. This is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, Triumph Over Trauma, because this is significant and requires really some help and intervention. And I want to also encourage you, take my trauma test at A Place of Hope, go to the tab that says test and take the trauma test. It'll help identify the degree of the challenge or the issues. It's free, it's confidential, and it's a good place just to start. But I want to say it again. Hope comes when there's a plan, and we need to create a positive plan of healing and restoration.